Millionaire receives a mother's plea for help by mistake and ends up finding true love. The night was settling over Ciudad Santa Aurora like a heavy curtain. High above the city, in its quietest and most expensive neighborhood, Miguel Navarro was reviewing the day's numbers once again. Transactions, transfers, donation reports to charities he didn't even know by name. Everything worked, everything in its place, except him. On his phone screen, nothing new. Just that white, addictive glow that lit up a face with no witnesses. The apartment was luxurious, but there were no paintings on the walls, no living plants, no presence other than the uncomfortable memory of an absence. His mother, the only person who'd ever been able to break through the glass of his life. Miguel lived surrounded by numbers and silence, and in both, he hid. Then his phone buzzed. A short message. Unknown number. I'm sorry to bother you. My baby has a fever and there's no more milk or diapers. I swear I'll pay you back when I can. I just need help right now. Anything. He won't stop crying. No attachments, no greeting, no dramatic plea. Just raw truth and hunger. Miguel read the message more than once. There was something in it that burned slowly. It wasn't pity, it was something else. A kind of urgency that didn't come from outside, but from within. Before he even realized it, he was on his feet. He grabbed his wallet, put on his coat, and for the first time in months, he didn't call anyone. He went alone. In the trunk, diapers, powdered milk, a thermometer, and a children's medicine he always kept on hand, out of habit, or maybe guilt. The GPS stuttered through the streets of Colonia San Gabriel. It was late, but fear there never slept. Miguel kept driving anyway. The street was dark, the sidewalk uneven, windows shut like tired eyes. At the door of house 42B, he stopped, took a deep breath, rang the bell. It took a while. When the door finally opened, his eyes met hers, eyes that weren't begging for charity, they were asking for help, silently. The woman was holding a baby wrapped in a worn blanket. The crying was soft but constant, a kind of cry that had already run out of strength, and Miguel felt that deep in his gut. He didn't say his name, didn't explain why he was there. He just held out the bags. For a few seconds, time stopped. She hesitated. He didn't move. The baby cried louder, and then finally she took what he'd brought. The gate closed. No, thank you, no promises. Miguel walked back to the car in silence, his breath caught in his chest. His heart was pounding, not from fear, but from an emotion he hadn't felt in years, something between helplessness and relief. On that drive back, the city looked different, no longer quiet, just speechless. Inside the house, Ana Paula prepared the milk with trembling hands. Tears fell without asking permission. It was pride-breaking, it was exhaustion, it was painful relief. She didn't know who that man was, didn't know why he helped. She only knew that, because of a typo, a silent plea had fallen into the right hands. And for a moment the world wasn't so cruel. The next day dawned like any other, but for Ana Paula everything was different. The baby was asleep, the crying had stopped. There was milk in the bottle, clean diapers on the makeshift dresser, and a note on the kitchen table. If you need more, let me know. M. She read it slowly, as if the words might change meaning, but they didn't. They stayed, solid, like him. There was no full name, no explanations, just a straight, silent line, like the gesture of someone who helps without expecting anything in return. Ana Paula tucked the paper between the pages of an old planner. She didn't reply. She didn't throw it away either. She preferred to believe it had been an exception, a useful mistake, a one-time miracle. But miracles are rarely one-time things. Miguel came back. Not the same day, not at the same hour, but he came back. He knocked on the door with the same gentleness as before, brought fewer things this time. A pack of diapers, fever medicine, and a tired yet familiar expression, as if the whole city had turned again just to bring him back there. This time, Ana Paula didn't question him. She just left the door slightly open and went back to her son, who was coughing softly, his body still warm. Miguel didn't come in. He set the items on the table, silently. He watched the baby for a few seconds. The pale skin, the half-closed eyes, the effort to breathe. Then he said, almost in a whisper, "He needs a doctor." She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The pride was still there, but smaller than the fear. 2 days later, a different car stopped on the street. Miguel got out and waited by the gate. Ana Paula came out carrying Mateo, wrapped in a better blanket. The little one wasn't crying, but he wasn't smiling either. It was as if he'd been waiting too long for something. In Dr. Salgado's office, the tension was different, quiet, but heavy. The doctor was an old acquaintance of Miguel's, and he treated the baby carefully without asking questions. Strong flu, mild dehydration, a clear prescription, rest, fluids, and someone who cares. Miguel heard everything. Ana Paula did too, but she heard more than words. What she heard was a kind of attention she didn't recognize. A man who didn't run from difficulties, who didn't offer pity or charity, just presence. When they left, Mateo was asleep in Miguel's arms, and for the first time, Ana Paula noticed her son didn't cry with him, didn't resist. Maybe right there, something was being born, something neither of them could yet name. The following days brought new routines. Miguel began showing up at the little market where Ana Paula worked. He bought small things, nothing that drew attention, but he always showed up. They exchanged few words, sometimes none, just a nod, a long look, and the unspoken certainty that there was something between them, shapeless still, but real. Mateo was getting better, sleeping better, playing with his hands, crying only occasionally. The fever was gone. In its place remained a gentler warmth, that of a man's presence who didn't run at the first sign of responsibility. And for Ana Paula, that was new. The first outing was almost accidental. A Sunday with weak sunlight, Cedros Park nearly empty, and Miguel waiting outside the house without making promises. Ana Paula hesitated, but she went. Mateo ran across the grass with his first unsteady steps. And when he stumbled, it wasn't his mother's arms he reached for. It was Miguel's. She watched from a distance, her son's laughter, the way the man knelt to catch him, the care with which he wiped the scraped knee. It broke her in ways she wasn't ready to admit. That night, alone with Mateo asleep in her lap, Ana Paula tried to understand what was happening. It still hurt. It still weighed on her to have accepted help. It still stung to depend on someone. But at the same time, she had never felt so supported. There were no promises, no vows, just gestures, just actions. And she had always learned to trust deeds, not words. Miguel was made of that. Silences that spoke. Small movements that said, "I'm here." And for someone who had spent years hearing doors close, that was almost unbearably beautiful. Miguel, on the other hand, was learning how to live with presence again. His visits to San Gabriel had become part of his routine. He'd set aside formal meetings, obligatory dinners, and events that required tuxedos and emotional absence. Instead, he was learning to recognize the creak of a rusty gate, the smell of cheap coffee, the sound of a baby calling him with a confused syllable. Miguel had no experience with children or with families, but he was learning, slowly, without plans. There, in that small two-room house, he began to feel needed, not important, not admired, just needed. And that was more than he'd had in a very long time. The city kept moving, nights came and went, but now something had changed. The mistaken message had never been corrected, and thank God for that, because sometimes what looks like an accident is just destiny in disguise. Time didn't ask for permission. The days, once rough and repetitive for Ana Paula, began to stitch themselves together with a different texture. What used to be survival became presence. What used to be urgency became constancy. And in the middle of it all, she began to see differently. Mateo was growing. The fever was gone. But Miguel stayed. He stayed even when she fell silent, even when she pretended she didn't need help anymore, even when by instinct she tried to push him away. He stayed. In the small kitchen, Miguel learned to wash the dishes without being asked. In the yard, he built a new clothesline when the old one broke. In the living room, he fixed the fan with his own hands. None of it felt forced. None of it came from pride. And Ana Paula began to realize he wasn't there to fix her. He was there because he wanted to stay. Their meetings started happening outside the routine. A park here, a square there. Simple, no grand setting, but enough for Miguel to show something few people ever saw: the softness hidden behind his polished exterior. At the San Lucas Grove, they sat side by side on an uneven wooden bench. Sunlight filtered through the trees, painting everything in a slow, golden tone. The place was quiet, but full of old stories whispered by the leaves. There, Miguel spoke. Not everything, but enough. He talked about his childhood, his absent father, his mother who made miracles out of little, and who left too soon. He spoke of his first apartment, of the fear of not being enough, even surrounded by success, and of how success, instead of filling him, only deepened the echo of emptiness. Ana Paula listened, not with pity, but with the calm of someone who also knew absence. When he fell silent, she said only one thing: "I understand silence. It lives here too." It was the most intimate sentence they'd exchanged that day, and yet it was all they needed to say. Miguel started living between two worlds. At work, he still wore the same suits, made quick decisions, signed million-dollar contracts. But the rush had lost its meaning. What really moved him now was Saturday afternoons with Mateo in his arms, short walks with Ana Paula through the neighborhood streets, quiet conversations spoken through glances while the baby slept. He never said he was in love. He didn't need to. She never said she was allowing herself to feel, but she was. It was love, quiet, discreet, but deep, rooted. One gray afternoon, Miguel climbed the steps of the Church of Santa Clara. Father Almeida awaited him with that patient smile of someone who already knows the answers before hearing the questions. They talked for a long time, about choices, about losses, about purpose. Miguel confessed he had no clear plans, just one persistent desire to build something that couldn't be bought. On his way back, he stopped in front of Ana Paula's house. From across the street, he watched for a few minutes. She was hanging clothes on the line. Mateo was playing with a bowl of water on the ground. It was an ordinary scene, domestic, almost banal, but to Miguel, it was everything. There it was, what he'd been searching for all those years, a kind of peace that didn't need luxury to exist. It was on her porch, days later, that the gesture happened. No bent knee, no fancy ring, no rehearsed speech. Miguel simply handed her an envelope. Inside, an official document, the request to adopt Mateo, and with it, a letter. Ana Paula read slowly. Her eyes filled before she reached the end of the first page. Everything was said gently, without haste, without pressure. He wasn't asking for love. He was asking for trust. He promised presence and a future where she wouldn't have to be everything alone. When she looked up, he was there, still waiting. Not like someone waiting for an answer, but like someone who respects time. She didn't say yes. She didn't have to. She stepped closer and embraced him. Long, silent, steady. That night, Mateo slept between them. The open window let in the scent of damp earth and the distant sounds of the city. The fan hummed softly. The world outside was still urgent, harsh, hurried. But inside that house, there was a rare kind of quiet. It wasn't the end of struggle, but the beginning of something better. A life less lonely. A home. Life doesn't change all at once. It sheds its skin quietly. Days after the letter, Ana Paula woke to a house bathed in light. Matteo was sleeping deeply, his small fingers curled into a fist, as if he no longer feared anything. Miguel was there, not just on the couch. He was in the details, in the full coffee pot, in the folded blanket, in the sneakers by the crib. He was there as if he had always belonged. The wedding wasn't lavish, no long guest list, but it had presence. At the church of Santa Clara, the flowers were simple. Ana Paula's dress, borrowed from a neighbor, was light fabric with long sleeves, the veil pinned with discreet clips. She trembled, but not from fear. Miguel waited at the altar, eyes calm, the look of a man who no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. Matteo entered in the arms of Mr. Ramiro, Miguel's old driver, proud, as if presenting his grandson to the world. When Ana Paula walked in, no one breathed, not because of the beauty of the moment, but because of its truth. She walked slowly, her eyes locked on his, and there, in the silence before the vows, everyone understood. This wasn't an ordinary wedding. It was a beginning of two interrupted stories finding their way again. The reception took place at Hacienda Los Arreboles in the Valle Encantado, a secluded place surrounded by hills and tall trees. The afternoon faded slowly. The sky seemed to open just for that small celebration. There was no loud music, no dance floor, only violins in the background, handmade food and quiet laughter scattered across the lawn. Ana Paula danced with Miguel under soft yellow string lights. No choreography, just uncertain, light steps, as if rediscovering themselves in motion. Matteo ran between the tables, her dress twirled in the wind, and for the first time she didn't feel smaller than anyone. In the months that followed, life carried a different kind of weight, not the weight of struggle but of building. Miguel and Ana Paula moved into a house in Alta Vista. The facade was white, with wide windows and a porch where Matteo loved to play with his plastic truck. There, Ana Paula discovered a new kind of silence. Not the silence of absence, but of peace. When Isabella was born, the world seemed to start over. She arrived on a calm morning with a clear sky and the smell of fresh coffee in the kitchen. Miguel held his daughter in his arms as if he'd been waiting for her his whole life. Ana Paula cried quietly, not from pain, but from gratitude. It was an old cry kept for years, a cry that said, "Now, it's finally okay." The outings, once out of reach, became routine. On Sundays, San Martin Zoo filled with small laughter. Matteo ran among the stone animals, pulling his father by the hand. At the Little Comet Museum, Isabella watched lights and planets with wide eyes, while Miguel explained every star as if it were the most important thing in the world. And maybe it was. Because there, in that miniature universe, Miguel and Ana Paula finally understood each other, without words. Life's mistakes hadn't disappeared, the past hadn't been erased, but it had been welcomed, and that was enough. On a rainy afternoon, Ana Paula sat on the porch with her phone in hand. The children were asleep. Miguel was washing the dishes. She opened the old planner, the one where she'd kept the first note. She typed something slowly, didn't send it to anyone. It was just for the record. That night, I dialed the wrong number, but I got life right. She looked inside the house and smiled. Sometimes miracles come disguised as accidents, and sometimes the right answer arrives, even when the question was sent to the wrong number. Tell me in the comments, do you believe in coincidences or in destiny? Leave a like and subscribe. It helps share stories that warm the heart in a world that's grown so cold.